So for those that have been with us over the last few weeks, we have been going through the Apostle of John, the book of John, seeing about the life of Jesus and the things that he's been doing. This morning we're going to pick up the story, okay, in John 4, where Jesus is going to a place called Samaria. I want to give you a bit of context. I've been looking into the context of this because the Samaritans and the Jews didn't like each other. Did you know that? They just didn't get on. Actually, they didn't get on. They were literally opposed. They were enemies. They were enemies of each other. And I want to give you a little bit of context to the reason why. Okay? Because unless we know the backstory, it's very difficult to go into the story where Jesus and how significant this moment was for Jesus to be talking to a Samaritan woman. And a woman of things. Women are always known as the lower classes. They were always kept down by the authorities. It doesn't matter which way you were. That's what happened. But a bit of background. So there are 5 main differences. Okay? 5 main differences between the Samaritans and the Jews. The first is, Samaria was part of the homeland of the Jews. That's the first thing. But then, when you go back into the Old Testament and you go into the books of the Kings and 2 Kings, we've got the king of Assyria, which kicks a load of people into Samaria. He didn't like them. He basically, there was an issue in the country. I'm going to read those few verses for you. But the idea was, basically, if you did something wrong, you went to the dumping ground of Samaria. That's effectively what it was talking about. So let's just pick that up in 2 Kings 17, 24, 25. It says this: Then the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kula, Ava, Hamath, and from Saphrim, wherever that is, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and dwelt in the cities, and it was so, at the beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. When you actually reflect, there's a conflict going on now, which has been going on for centuries, whereas you've got a people who have been dispossessed of their land, but now people are trying to claim that land back. And you can see that about Israel right today. You can see that about, if you go into the Middle East, you see every single country that is surrounding around Israel, every single one of them want a part of Israel. Every single one of them. They don't believe that they have a right to be there. And so there's conflict going on all the time. When we actually look at the context of this, we have the Jews that were already in the land, the people that were already in the land, plus then all of a sudden the king of Babylon comes along and it brings a load of people in, and the two of them at first didn't get on, but then something happened. Then they started to like each other, then they started to marry each other, then they started to have children with each other, and then all of a sudden the Israelites who were told by God not to interbreed did. So they completely went against the law of Moses. In Matthew 26, 24, and here in Luke, it says this: No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and Mammon. The situation is why we're here, whereas you have these 2 nations which combine together. It's effectively, they just joined together and they completely opposed, completely in opposition to what God was saying. But not only that, the Israelites started to worship idols. There's one thing to worship your God, the only God that you know, but then all of a sudden you thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to live their life. I quite like what they're doing. So they started doing what they were doing. And then all of a sudden you find them actually worshipping God with one hand and worshipping idols with another. It does not work. You cannot have your foot in both camps. You cannot sit on the fence. It's impossible. And as Christians, we know that. We either serve God or we serve man, and either way, there will be a consequence. Serving God is one thing where we know that we go to heaven, we know we have this glory, He has saved us and redeemed us, whereas we serve man, the consequence is the complete opposite. The complete opposite. God actually refuses to recognize us. God turns His back on us. Why? Because we turned our back on God first. Not the other way around. We turn our back on God first. This people of Samaria, these Israelites that lived there, turned their back on God first. There was a punishment. There was a punishment. When you actually think about it, it says the lions come. God sends the lions, and He killed some. It doesn't say how many, but it would have been a sign to those people to say, I'm not happy with you, and this is a curse on you. I'm going to punish some of you. So at least they can stand up and actually think. We don't know why things like pandemics happen. We don't know why all these things around us happen. We don't know what happens in our particular lives, in our families. But very often when we actually look back at some of the bad things that happen, it's as a consequence of our own decisions. It's a consequence of our own decisions. We have done something and God has not been pleased with it. You know, the old saying, you make your bed and you lie in it. And there's nothing truer in that statement. Secondly, the Jews, after they returned from Babylon, began rebuilding their temple. You know the story of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah has been incensed at the fact that the walls of Jerusalem have been abandoned, the whole city have been smashed to pieces, and he went to the king and he said, I want to rebuild it. So he was given resources to go and start to rebuild the temple walls of Jerusalem. And the Sumerians, surprisingly, didn't like it. They didn't like it. Hang on a minute, Jerusalem, what? No, we've got a different centre here where we worship. No, you can't have that. That's not right. That's not right. But Nehemiah, because he was doing exactly what God asked him to do, he rebuilt the walls. And for all the distractions sometimes that were thrown at him, oh Nehemiah, we need a word. No, I'm busy building a wall. Nehemiah, can you come in? No, I'm building a wall. Nehemiah, can I? And very often, when we are building stuff for God, distractions come. And sometimes we've got to be very careful and guard what exactly it is that God has actually asked us to do. And we've got to protect it, and we are not to be distracted from it. And very often that can happen in our own lives. It can happen within the church. A lot of churches fail because they are distracted with something else. And we've got to be very careful we keep our focus on what it is that God has asked us to do. The Samaritans built a temple for themselves. They weren't having Jerusalem as the capital. No, we'll build our own. We'll build our own. So opposition there again. A few weeks ago we were talking about having lives of being a vessel. Simpson shared, if you remember, I don't know if you were here, you know, all the concoctions that he was making an absolute mess. But the principle was saying how we can have a life and then we start putting all sorts of stuff into it which aren't good things, and in the end, effectively, with all that, with all due respect, it was like poison. Even Simpson didn't even attempt to drink it, which must have been, it was for him like the amount of curry powder that he put into it. But it was reflective of all the rubbish that we could fill our lives with, which then dirty us. And we need God to come along to purify us. We need God to purify us. And this is the trouble with the Samaritans. They weren't being told by anybody. And we can be sometimes like that. We would not be taught by anybody. You can't tell me. But actually, just prior to the service starting, we were just having a conversation, Anna and myself, and we said about, well, if I say anything, she said, oh, you'll be the first to know. But that's how it should. If we say something wrong, we should be there ready, or if we do something wrong, we should be there ready to stand and take correction. That's what they call being humble. That's not proud, that's being humble. We are ready to take correction. Why? Because sometimes that person is actually speaking on behalf of God himself. And they're saying as a brother, because they love you, because they care for you, or a sister, because they love you and care for you. Listen, mate, what you said wasn't right. What you did wasn't right. You need to sort it out. And we should be able to take that correction and not fly off the handle. We live lives where we build our own temples. We fill it with all sorts of things. And things aren't always good for us. Some things aren't always good for us. Did you know that? I love sugar. I love sugar. I'm sorry, I just love sugar. Guess what is not good for you? It's not good for the cavities in your teeth. To start off, it's not good for your figure. It's not good for your blood pressure. It's not good for anything, to be honest, when you have it in excess. But sometimes, and eventually, eventually it starts to tell. Eventually it starts to tell. Not only do you recognise it, but other people start recognising it. Oh, that's real. Why have you got so many spots? Not that you would say that, but we think it sometimes, especially of youngsters. But that's a natural progression of the body. But when you get older, that's not right. But some things happen, and bodily changes when we have excesses of anything that isn't good for us. When we truly come to Christ, everything has to change. Everything. We can't just please ourselves anymore. When we say that we love God, here's the thing. When we say that we love God, we'll want to please Him. Things like doing good just become second nature. We don't do good because of salvation, we do good because of Christ. Yeah. That's the truth. And because of Christ changing our lives, we would just want to do good. Why? Because it pleases Him. Why? Because it helps other people. We want to see each other built up. That's what it's all about. And then Samaria became a place of refuge. In Joshua 20, we haven't got time to look at it, but in Joshua 20 and in Joshua 21, it talks about how people that make mistakes in their own land, instead of taking the punishment, were cast out. You haven't made an accident, I don't know how this happens, but we would class it these days as manslaughter, where you accidentally killed somebody. Okay? Instead of taking the punishment, you'd be cast out. I'm sorry you can't live here anymore, you're unsafe. Leave. Oh, where would they go? One of the places, Samaria. So not only was there everything else, and not only were they, worshipping idols and God. How that can work, I don't know. But now you've got this bunch of people which are criminals as well coming along, and everything is a mess. Everything is a mess. They're getting bad teaching. They're worshipping idols. Oh, by the way, they're a bunch of criminals, or cast-offs, or the dregs of society. We don't want you here. We'll throw you to the dumping ground of Samaria. Not longer my problem. And that's effectively what was happening. No wonder there was the problems between the Israelites, who thought they were God's perfect people, and you have these people who are basically all the cast-offs. They don't want anything to do with us, and they don't want anything to do with them either. So that's effectively the story. That's just the introduction. Everybody's starting panicking now. But this is a situation we see Jesus. We see this situation where Jesus enters this country which no Israelite willingly would enter. Understand that. No Israelite would willingly enter. If they had a choice, they would go around. They would go around. But Jesus literally chose to enter. So we're going to pick it up and we're going to read the story this morning. I won't be too long with it, hopefully, depending on how many interruptions I get. So therefore, this is John chapter 4, verse 1 to 8 initially. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. But he needed to go through Samaria. So he came to the city of Samaria, and a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground where Jacob gave to his son. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied of his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it was who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and how he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than the father Jacob, who gave us his well, and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst or come to draw." Jesus said to her, "Go." I'm just going to pause it there. Jesus had a purpose to why he was where he was. There was nothing that Jesus ever did that he didn't do for a reason. John first tells us that he needed to go through Samaria. And this, what do we see? Jesus needed to go to Samaria. That's what John says. He didn't say, oh, Jesus chose to go to Samaria. Jesus just decided he was going to just wander into Samaria. He needed to go to Samaria. And this is what that's what the purpose was. It was for this woman. And this woman came on her own. And if you knew the culture of the day, most women first thing in the morning would get their water jars, and they weren't like a water bottle. That mind you, water bottles are getting bigger and bigger these days, aren't they? You get a water bottle this size, and my daughter's got one this. I'm like, really? Some people carry around 5-gallon drums of water every day. That was nothing like what these women were carrying. These were big stone water jars, and they put them up on their shoulders, and they carry them up to the well from the village or from the city, because the well was up on the hill outside of the town. They go to this well, and they would then fill up their water jars. But they always used to go in twos and threes. Why? Because women like to natter. Oh, come on, really? Seriously? Listen, you ever go out for a night, I'm telling you, the women always go to the toilet in twos. True? It is. Trust me. Anyway, the women used to go up with why? Because women were part of a community and they all used to go together. Okay? They could help each other with the water jars, they could actually pour and all those usual things. And it would either be morning or evening when they went. Why? Because it was cooler. This woman goes at the 6th hour. If you know anything about the Jewish calendar, the 6th hour was 12 o'clock midday, when the sun is highest in the sky and it is the hottest. What on earth was she doing? Why? Because the women of the community didn't want anything to do with her. She went on her own because nobody wanted anything to do with her. She was an outcast. Everybody knew her. She was sort of like one of those dirty women that you don't want to be anything to do with. Those friends that sometimes you actually, well, actually they're not really friends, you know, they're associates, or, you know, you sort of like distance yourself from them. This woman went to the well on her own because of her reputation. We said last week about Nicodemus. If you remember, we talked about Nicodemus last week. He went to Jesus at night time to save his reputation. This woman goes up to the well because of her reputation. And sometimes we do things in secret, or we do things on our own because we either don't want people to know, or we want to do it to keep it quiet. Jesus was not exclusive. Because we see in the story that he accepts anyone. He will talk to anyone. He doesn't care about background. He doesn't care about our past. He wants to know us in a personal way. He got to know this woman in a very personal way. He got to know all about her. By the way, just to let you know, he already knew her past. But such was the manner of Jesus, the woman told him anyway. You know, it's always a good place to start when we're in a relationship, or a relationship starting, is to be upfront and honest. Did you know that? You will never ever start put firm foundation or good foundation of a relationship and build a relationship if you're not honest from the outset. Because lies will soon come back to haunt. You cannot build a relationship on dishonesty. But these two, the Samaritan woman, Jesus, were having this communication. They were building the relationship. They were building that relationship, whereas this woman just opens up everything to him. Tells him everything there is about herself. In Mark 2:17 it says, when Jesus heard it, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. This woman was a sinner. This woman had done everything against what she was told. She grew up in this life of serving a God, but also idolatry, which also mixes it with everything else and all the other influences that she had in her life going on, which meant she said, I'll do whatever I want, whenever I want, with whoever I want. And that was her attitude. And she was outcast because of it. But she wasn't outcast to Jesus. Jesus did not cast her out. Jesus actually sat down and listened to everything she had to say. Jesus wants to reconcile you and I to himself. He wants to reconcile us. He wants that relationship with us. And how did he do this? He did it through his death on the cross. Again, going back to the story, just the previous chapter, talking about Nicodemus, where it says Jesus was placed on top, and the scripture was high and lifted up for all to see. He was raised on a cross for everybody to see. And 2,000 years later, we're still looking at the cross. We're still looking at the answer. Jesus did this by his death. He suffered and died so that we might live. Just like the Samaritan woman was going about her own business, but then she encountered Jesus. We go about our own business, and Jesus wants to encounter us. He seeks us out. We don't find him, he finds us. Not about what you're looking for. It's about what God is actually wanting to do. In fact, he wants us to find him, but he's looking for us first. It says that right at the beginning of that story. Jesus went into Samaria. He had to go. Why? Because his purpose was to find this woman, and this woman needed a life-changing, needed an experience, needed to have that been reconciled for all the things that she'd been done, and find faith in Jesus Christ, the answer. In Romans 5:10 it says, "For if we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son. Much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life." We were enemies, every single one of us in this room were enemies. We were opposed to what God wanted us to do. We were enemies. We're no longer enemies. We've been reconciled to Christ if we've given our lives to Christ. We've been saved by his life. This woman wasn't reconciled to Jesus herself. Sorry, this woman was reconciled to Jesus. But what did she do next? To have this conversation, this to and froing of this is what I've done. I've got husbands, and the person I'm living with now isn't my husband. She had a completely and utterly disorganized life, rejecting everything of what we would class as normal. But she encountered Jesus. She was reconciled to Jesus. You could see that relationship, and that thing changed so much so her life was changed. The next thing she did, she went back to the town, back to the city, and got all those people that were disconnected from her and said, "Look, I found a man that has told me everything about myself. Stuff that you already know, but I found a man who actually will listen to me, but also cares about me. And by the way, he's changing my life, and I can feel it right now." And she goes back with the story. You've got to come. You've got to come. This is what he's done for me, and I want him to do the same thing for you. Come with me. And the crowds came out of the city, and they all encountered Jesus. All these people that were just doing their own thing, living their own life, sitting on the fence, worshipping this, that, and the other. All these distractions in their life, but when all of a sudden they came to Jesus and found focus. They were reconciled to Jesus. Their lives were changed and transformed. If we actually read the story further, you will find, if you go right into the New Testament, and it goes into Acts, and it says that Jesus came not just for the Jew, but also for the Gentile. These were the outcasts of the outcasts. You couldn't get any lower, and Jesus stretched out his hand, picked them up, reconciled himself to them, and they came to faith in him. It doesn't matter what we've done. It doesn't matter what we will do. It doesn't matter what our past is. Jesus wants a relationship with us. And sometimes he will cause something in your life, whereas you have no other choice but to turn to him. We've seen it so many times before. In 2 Corinthians 5:18 says that. Now all things are of God, who has reconciled us to himself through Jesus Christ, and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. This woman who lived the life that she had, suddenly becomes the reconciler. Suddenly she becomes the way of pointing to Jesus. Suddenly, through the life-changing situation she has, she now shines a light out of her, which God has given her, and she goes into a village, and everybody's like, normally, these people would say, do one, get lost, I'm not listening to you. That's the reality of it. Who do you think you are? We have nothing to do with you. To use an old English word, you're a tramp. But something had changed in that woman's life, which suddenly these guys, these people in the city, thought, wow, something's happened. Something's happened. And it was visible and it was tangible. So much so they're like, we better listen to her. We don't know the time scale of how long it took her to get back into the city to bring those people out. We don't know that. But what we can be sure of, it was a significant moment. It was a significant moment. I just want to give a brief reflection over the last couple of weeks. Some of them were chatting at the house group on Thursday, and something sort of like triggered in my mind. And I've got it down here as if time. Have I got time? Yeah? Take a couple of minutes. In John 2, it says we had the wedding at Cana. You had a water for cleansing, water and water pots that was there where people had to ceremonially wash their hands because they were coming to a celebration. They were eating food. We also looked at the way the water, Jesus turned that water into wine, which represents his blood and the blood of sacrifice. And when we are washed with his blood, he washes us whiter than snow. In John 3, we have the water of being born again. Last week, Nicodemus, Jesus said to him, you have to be born of the Spirit and of water. So water is cleansing. The Spirit is the infilling. We've got to be born again. That gives us new life. It's a spirit of renewal, of rebirth. And in John 4, we see we have the water of baptism, or water for baptism, where Jesus was baptizing at the beginning of this chapter, at the beginning of this story, or his disciples were. People were coming to faith, and then this water of baptism, they were being buried in the water and rising, and their life was changing as they came out of the water. Confirming a decision, they were having to confess their faith in Jesus Christ. Confirming a decision to follow him. And then we have the water of refreshing. When we drink of his word, we absorb it. This refreshes our spiritual life with the water of life. This is what Jesus was offering this Samaritan woman. Come to me, and I will give you water that you will never want to drink again. We have that. We all have that available to us. I've not got my Bible with me. I've got an app on my phone which I use. I have words which I've got written down. But effectively, if we pick up a Bible, that's the water of refreshing. The more we read it, the more we get refreshed. The more we read it, all of a sudden things start to change in our minds and we start to be cleansed by it. Yeah. We start to be cleansed by it. It's water of refreshing and water of cleansing. And it refreshes our spiritual life. In John 4:23 it says this, but the hour is coming, and now is, that when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. That's what Jesus was telling this woman. It doesn't matter who you were worshipping before. You need to now worship me. You need to worship the Father in spirit and truth, because God is looking for true worshippers, not worshippers of idols, not worshippers of a limited faith of the five books of the Old Testament. No, we need to worship God of the full Testament, the Old Testament and the New, the whole book, because that's the God who we worship, not segregated to small few verses. Salvation no longer comes from the Jews, is what he was saying. Anyone can come to the Father. There is no separation anymore. The moment that woman was reconciled to Jesus, that was her moment. That was a moment of truth, where her eyes were opened and she saw Christ for who he was, the Messiah. And finally, and Paul says in Romans 8:38-39, "For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor anything present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus." There is no obstacles, there is no idolatry, there are no idols, or all of those things that we can concentrate on. None of those things, like in the Samaritan's woman's life, to cast it all aside, because now nothing can separate her from the love of Christ. If we put all those things aside, all those things that can distract us, guess what? Nothing can separate us from the love of Christ.
Amen.
Amen? Amen.